Okay, so on Friday we left off and we talked about the modes of nutrition that cells can use. Okay, we talked about photoautotrophs, okay, which are any organisms that can carry out photosynthesis, and they generally contain, okay, chloroplasts that allow them to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, generally they are plants, so they have a cell wall and a water vacuole. Okay, things that we talked about in terms of the cellular structure of photoautotrophs. Okay, and then we talked about chemo heterotrophs, which are cells from organisms that must consume organic material, usually from other organisms, for food. Okay, their cells need to be flexible, so they don't have a cell wall. Okay, generally, unless they're fungus, which is different. Okay, and that they also have lysosomes that are capable of digesting food. Okay, things like that. So we talked a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about it today as we go over the parts of the cell. And then I'm going to go into detail about what all the parts of the cell do. So as we're labeling, I'll tell you a brief description of what they do. Okay, you don't need to write that down, but we will be going through the notes on what each part does in detail right after we do that. Okay, so really all you need to do right now is make sure you get the labels on your cell diagram that you got on Friday. Anybody who didn't get one of those on Friday? Anybody else need one? All right, so which one is this, plant or animal? Animal, you better get that right because it's labeled on yours. Okay, all right, so we will start out at the top. Okay, this orange sausage-shaped organelle, okay, with those little folds inside it, okay, that is a mitochondria. Okay, and a mitochondria carries out cellular respiration. Okay, it's the part of the cell that burns sugar and releases its energy. Okay, and you would find this in both plant and animal cells, because even though plants carry out photosynthesis, photosynthesis doesn't give them the energy to do anything. Their mitochondria still have to burn that sugar that they make in photosynthesis. All right, we'll go clockwise around the cell here. Okay, the tail, don't label it, it's not a tail, don't label it that. Okay, it looks like a tail. I don't know why, but almost every animal cell diagram you see has one of these on it, even though very few animal cells, like less than 1% of them, actually have one of these. In fact, if you're female, you don't have any cells in your body that have one of these. Okay, if you're male, your sperm have these. Okay, and that's it. I don't know why they put it on every single generalized animal cell, because so few have it, but it's called a flagellum. If you were really lucky, when you looked at the euglena, you may have seen one of these. Okay? The euglena that you looked at the other day has a flagellum that it uses to swim around with. It's just a long, whip-like tail, okay, that they can thrash back and forth that will propel them along. Okay? Like I said, within your body, there are virtually no cells that require the ability to move around like that. Okay? Other than sperm, who obviously have to swim. Okay? But other than that, there's really no need for any other cell in your body to have a flagellum. Okay? Very few cells have them. All right. Moving on from there. Okay? This big purple thing. What's the big purple thing called in general? It's the nucleus. Now this one here is just pointing to the outside of the nucleus, which is the nuclear membrane. Okay. The nuclear membrane, like any other membrane, simply separates the nucleus from everything else. Okay. The nuclear membrane is probably the most restrictive of all the membranes, however. Okay? Because all of your DNA is contained within the nucleus, we don't want anything else to get in there. Because if it damages the DNA, you're in big trouble. Okay? So we don't want anything to get into the nucleus. Okay? We do want to allow some things to get out of the nucleus and the odd thing to return. Okay? But we don't want to have like lots of stuff going in and out of there because very precious information is stored there. Okay? So the only things that get in or out of the nucleus are genetic material, DNA and RNA. Okay? Those two things can get in and out of the nucleus through the little holes in its surface called nuclear pores. Okay? So they can actually open and close and allow DNA to go in or out, but it is the only thing that is allowed in or out. However, the other day we talked about how viruses reproduce, and obviously they can let in viral DNA, okay, which can then write itself into your DNA, and that's how your cell becomes infected and how it then produces viruses after that. Okay? All right. Okay, this line here is pointing at the nucleus itself. Okay, so right in our nuclear membrane, we will have nucleus. All right. Now, somewhere along the way, some well-meaning person told you that the nucleus is the brain of the cell. And man, I hate that. It's so not true. Okay, I get why in elementary school they might tell you that, but the nucleus is not a brain. Okay, the nucleus doesn't control anything. The nucleus simply stores information, and I think that's where the brain analogy comes from. But a brain does a lot of things. Okay? A brain sends and receives messages. A brain, controls functions and things like that. And the nucleus just doesn't do that. Okay? All the nucleus does is store your genetic information. So please, 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 do not ever write for the function of the nucleus, brain of the cell. I'll give you a 0 on the whole test. No, I won't. But I'll give you a 0 on that because it's not a brain. Okay? And the other big reason, a brain is made of many cells. This is one cell, so it's not a brain. Okay? Are we clear on that? I think I've said it's not a brain like a dozen times already. It's not a brain. Okay? It stores DNA. That's all it does. Okay? Now, the little thing inside it, that does control something. Okay? This is the nucleolus. All right, you can see they're very close in spelling. So on a labeling quiz or a test, you would have to spell these two correctly. I'm a little more forgiving on other ones, but these two, because they're so close, do need to be spelled correctly. Okay? Nucleus and nucleolus are different. Now, the nucleolus produces ribosomes and, more importantly, makes copies of your genetic material. Okay? If the nucleus is a library, the nucleolus is the librarian. Okay? If we're looking for analogies here. So your nucleus is full of genetic information. Every single instruction, blueprint, whatever, to make everything you need is stored there. The nucleolus knows where it is. Okay? And the nucleolus's job is to find that information, copy it, and send it out to the parts of the cell that can do it. Right? So when your cell needs to make something, okay, like let's say it needs to make insulin, your cell will signal to the nucleus, insulin is needed. The nucleolus will find the part of your DNA that is the instructions for making insulin. It will make a copy of that section of the DNA and send that copy out of the nucleus into the cell. Okay? The ribosomes will pick it up and they'll make your insulin. Right? The original copy of your DNA never leaves the nucleus. Okay? So this is not a library where they lend out the book. Okay? This is a library where they make a copy of the book because they can't risk not having the book brought back. Okay? Everybody with me there? Right? So the nucleolus helps to control the synthesis of proteins by copying your DNA. Okay? Copies your DNA, sends it out into the cell where things can be made. All right, now I said the nucleolus can make ribosomes and it copies DNA. These little dots here that are the next thing being labeled, those are ribosomes. They're the smallest of all organelles. Okay? So ribosomes, R-I-B-O-S-O-M-E-S. Okay. All ribosomes do is make protein. That's it. Okay. They take that copied DNA that the nucleolus sends out, and they read it, and they make the protein that those instructions code for. Okay. Now ribosomes can be floating around freely in the cell. You see lots of those little dots everywhere in the cell. But lots of them are right near the nucleus, attached to this blue stuff. Okay? And because they attach to this blue stuff, they make it have a very rough appearance. Okay? And so that's why we call this blue stuff that has the ribosomes on it rough endoplasmic reticulum. Which we abbreviate ER. Okay, so on a quiz or a test, you just have to write rough ER or smooth ER. That's the other type. Okay. Now, the job of the rough ER, covered in ribosomes, its job is to quickly transport the proteins those ribosomes make. Okay, so the rough ER transports proteins. All right. Next organelle we got labeled is the outer boundary of the cell, which we would call the cell membrane. Exactly. So no diagram really represents very well what the what the cell membrane looks like. It's not this featureless wrapping of the cell. Okay, it's actually a double layer of fat. Okay, so fat molecules, as you probably have seen, repel water. Okay, like if you get like oil on water, it goes to the top, sits on the top, or spreads out into little beads everywhere. Okay, they repel each other. Okay, so a membrane being made of fats means that you basically don't allow stuff to move across it unless you actually want it to. Okay, so the cell membrane is kind of like a border, right? Not like Trump's wall, but like a border that you can allow things to go across, okay, through little holes and stuff like that. Okay, well, sorry, then it is kind of like that. Okay, yeah. So but it's a fence. What did it end up being? Anybody know? Because it was a wall and then it was a fence, and I don't even know what it ever ended up being. We didn't get one, but yeah, whatever. Okay, so we got this cell membrane that basically is these layers of fats, and fat molecules have tails on them, okay? And the tails face each other, and the heads of the fat molecules face away, and that creates this layer that basically separates the inside of the cell from its surroundings. And because it repels water, okay, it basically keeps materials from just mixing constantly. Okay, there's still going to be some movement slowly across, but it doesn't. It actually creates this kind of barrier. Okay, but it isn't smooth. Okay, there's all kinds of stuff embedded in the cell membrane. Okay, so rather than looking like a piece of cellophane, imagine it's like Jell-O salad. Okay, that's actually more like what it would look like. So if you've ever seen Jell-O salad, it's Jell-O, but it's got all kinds of stuff in it, grapes and fruit and other kinds of things like that. Okay, stuff sticks out of it. That's more like what the cell membrane looks like, and it's more close to its consistency as well. Okay, more like a jelly. Okay, as opposed to like a plastic layer. Okay. All right, and then we've got. Okay, and then another thing that very few cell diagrams do a good job of showing is how much of this next organelle there actually is. Okay, they show some of it here, they show some of it over here, okay, but in actual fact, it fills up a lot of the cell's volume. And that's because it's second to the nucleus, probably the most important organelle that there is. Okay, this is the smooth ER. Right? And the smooth ER has lots of jobs. Okay? It transports lipids or fats. Okay? So it has a big role to play in maintaining the integrity of the cell membrane. Because your cell membrane, like any border, okay, is going to take abuse. Stuff's going to try to get in, okay, it's going to get damaged, it's going to encounter things that are going to break parts of it, and it has to be repaired constantly. Okay? So the smooth ER transports these lipids, and it can get it to the cell membrane very quickly and aid in the repair of the cell membrane. Okay? It also breaks down complex carbohydrates. Okay? Now, complex carbohydrates are things like starches. So if you've had pasta, rice, or potatoes recently, you've consumed starch. Okay? Starch are long chains of sugar molecules. Right? If your cell is going to use starch, it first has to be broken down into the simple sugars that make it up, and that goes on here in the smooth ER. Okay? It can break the starches down into simple sugars that your mitochondria can burn in cellular respiration. All right, it also detoxifies poisons. So what part of your body does that? What part of your body detoxifies your blood? Your liver, yeah. Okay? Your liver is responsible for breaking down poisons and detoxifying your blood. Okay? Your liver is often responsible for the symptoms, not that any of you know this, of a hangover. Okay? So if you've consumed, large amounts of alcohol or other toxins, your body has to break those down out of your blood, okay? And your liver will break them down, but a lot of the materials it produces as a result of that breakdown are irritating to your digestive tract. It has to get rid of them. That's the best place to get rid of them, is in your digestive tract. So it does end up secreting a lot of the broken down material back into your digestive tract, giving you nausea, okay? Sometimes causing you to throw up, okay? Things like that, okay? That can be related to that, right? Right, and last job is that hormones can also be transported and produced to some extent here, okay? So certain hormones can be produced there. All right, next thing, okay, is this orange organelle, and that is the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is responsible for getting rid of wastes. It's the garbage man of the cell. Sorry, garbage man is not the politically correct way to say that. The sanitation technician is the politically correct term for the person who handles recycling and garbage. Okay, so the Golgi apparatus has two sides. Okay, it has like a side that takes it in and a side that ships it out. Okay, so waste materials, which can be toxic, come in one side of the Golgi and they get packaged. Really, all the Golgi does is bag the garbage. Okay, so garbage comes in on one side, and when it leaves the other side, it's surrounded by a vesicle, which is made of exactly the same material as the cell membrane. So it's effectively made a little pocket, okay, of membrane material that contains something that's bad for the cell. So we put that in a bag, so it can't get everywhere, okay, make stuff dirty, okay, whatever, right? And that will just migrate to the cell membrane, and when it gets to the cell membrane, it'll just merge with the membrane, and whatever was inside just pops out of the cell, okay? Everyone kind of follow me on that? It's kind of like if you picked up after your dog, okay, and you put the bag over your hand, right, you pick up the poop, right, and you turn it inside out. Well, if you were gonna try and, not that you would do this, try and reuse the bag, okay, go over to the garbage and turn it back outside again, okay? That's kind of what happens from the Golgi. Stuff gets into a vesicle, and then the vesicle merges with the membrane, and whatever's in there gets popped out. All right, next thing. This little organelle here that looks like a little bubble that's got stuff in it, that's a lysosome. That's where digestion takes place. You are only going to find these in animal cells. Plant cells do not have these. Okay? And obviously that's because plants don't need to digest their food. All right? That would include a Venus flytrap. Okay? Even a Venus flytrap is not going to have lysosomes. Okay? Its cells can produce digestive enzymes, but that digestion takes place outside. Okay? And then the nutrients are absorbed differently, so they still don't have any lysosomes. Okay, next thing on the list are these like tubular looking things, and there's actually different types of these. There's these ones here that are hollow tubes, and there's these ones up here that are just filaments. Okay, so these are microtubules, these are microfilaments, but they're all part of one structure. That is the cytoskeleton. Cytoskeleton would be good enough as a label on a quiz or a test. Okay? Specifically, those are microtubules, so they're hollow tubes. Okay? Their job is that they help maintain cell structure, okay? So that the cell can be flexible, it can twist and stretch and compress without breaking. Okay? Just like your bones allow you to kind of do the same thing. Right? That's why it's called a cytoskeleton. They're not really bones, because obviously bones are not flexible. Okay? But these flex, they hold the cell and allow it to not rupture when it changes shape. Now, in muscle cells, you break these all the time. These are kind of how muscle fibers and building of muscle works. As you break these, they come back stronger, okay, and often larger, okay, and that's how you build up muscle. All right, next thing, actually let's go up here and we'll label these ones here as well. So this is also cytoskeleton. Okay, but these are specifically microfilaments as opposed to tubules because they're not tubular. All right, next thing on the list are these two little kind of gear-shaped organelles. You will only find these in animal cells, and they are the centrioles. Now, the centriole's job is to help with cell division. Okay, we were kind of talking about this last week, but when the cell is getting ready to divide, the first thing it does is it copies all of its DNA. Normally, a cell contains 2 copies of every chromosome. Okay, so you have 46 chromosomes in a normal cell. Okay, 2 copies of each of the 23. Okay, there are 23 chromosomes in the human genome, but you get 1 set of 23 from mom, and you get 1 set of 23 from dad. Okay, those combine, and then the way in which you express those genes, dominant, recessive, is what makes you who you are. Okay, but also why you have lots of similarities to mom and dad. Okay, so when an animal cell is getting ready to divide, it copies all of the DNA. So just before it divides, it actually has 4 copies of every chromosome. And they all line up right in the middle of the cell. Okay? And what the centrioles do, so if this is a cell getting ready to divide, okay, right across the middle will be all of the chromosomes. Okay? The centrioles will migrate to the poles of the cell. And then what they'll do is they put out a little fiber that attaches to each copy that it's going to need. Okay? And then, before the cell divides, the centrioles at each end pull the chromosomes apart, and they make sure, all right, I've got 46, you got 46, we're good. Okay? So the centrioles just make sure all the DNA goes where it's supposed to go. Okay? And the reason animal cells need centrioles is because during cell division, it's possible that the animal cell could radically change shape. And if they were just relying on everything going where it's supposed to go, that would be a problem. Okay? It would be like trying to organize an evacuation of a building during an earthquake. Okay? So trying to get everybody out the right door while the whole building is shaking. Okay? It wouldn't be a really reliable way to do that. Okay? So these centrioles, okay, they put out a cable or a fiber to each chromosome and pull it. Okay? So it's essentially, all right, you're coming over here, that one's going over there, we're all going to get what we need. Okay? That sort of makes sense? All right, and then we've got this little bubble here that looks empty, and it kind of is. Okay? It's a peroxisome. A peroxisome contains the same digestive enzymes as a lysosome. There's just no digestion going on yet. Okay? Your Golgi actually produces these. Okay? It makes these peroxisomes, which contain the digestive enzymes, okay? And they kind of just float around until they merge with a food vacuole, which is basically another bubble, but it's full of food. Okay? When they merge, they become a lysosome and digestion begins. Right? So it's technically not a lysosome until there's food in it and there's digestion going on. Okay? All right, one thing that's not labeled, and we're going to put a label to it right here. Cytoplasm. All of your cells are filled up with a fluid. Okay? It's essentially water. Okay? It's not like Jello or anything like that. Okay? It's just a fluid. Okay? But it contains all kinds of stuff. Okay? Salts and sugars and all kinds of things that would be floating around in the cell. Okay? The cytoplasm is there because if the cell was just full of air, it would be difficult to transport anything. We need fluid for things to be transported from one place to another, okay? And if it was not full of fluid, the organelles wouldn't kind of float around in the cell. Gravity would just pull them all to the bottom, okay? And so wouldn't work very well. So cells are always full of this fluid. Okay, questions on the animal cell? All right, then let's look at the plant cell. Luckily, a lot of this is the same, so I'll go really fast for the plant cell. Okay? So we'll start here. What was this thing in the animal cell, the sausage-shaped one? Mitochondria. Okay, it does the same thing it does in the animal cell. It carries out cellular respiration, burns sugar for energy. Okay, down below that, we got all these little dots. What are the little dots called? Starts with R. Ribosomes. Okay, ribosomes make protein using DNA and RNA from the nucleus. All right, down below that are two little lines here, but I actually kind of scribbled them out because they're not super important, but they're cellulose fibers. Okay, again, not terribly important, so we're not going to bother to label them. Okay, the next thing though is really important. It makes a photoautotroph a photoautotroph. What's the big green thing called? Chloroplast. So that is not in an animal cell. You would only find that in a plant cell, and of course its job is to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, next one over. This orange thing takes out the trash. Golgi Apparatus, right. I'm just going to start over. Golgi. Man, I'm having trouble with that. G-O-L-G-I, apparatus. Sure, I can spell apparatus, but I can't spell Golgi. Okay, So Golgi Apparatus packages wastes for removal from the cell. Okay, if this is a cell in an animal that's producing hormones, they can also this can also help to excrete them. They can help to, or not excrete, secrete the hormone molecules. All right, down here we see that the cell wall, the big orange thing, okay, is cut away so we can see the layer behind it. What would be the layer behind it? The cell membrane. Yeah. Plants have a cell wall, but they also have a cell membrane. Okay. Now, it's the cell membrane that selects what gets in and out of the cell in both plant cells and animal cells. Okay, it's the border patrol. Okay, it's the customs officers or whatever, the people that are controlling what gets in or out. Okay, that's what the cell membrane does. It controls endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, that's movement into and out of the cell, right? Because not everything gets across. Now, the cell wall, on the other hand, everybody figures that this cell wall, especially given the way it always looks in a diagram, is this solid barrier that nothing gets through. Okay? They picture it as superior to the cell membrane in its ability to block things from getting into the cell, and then they always say it protects the cell. It actually does nothing of the sort. Cell wall is actually a really bad name for this structure. It's a wall in the same way that a house that's being framed has walls. Okay? So have you ever seen a house wall that's being built and it's just being framed? Could you walk in and out of it easily? Yeah, you just turn and walk between the studs, right? Okay? That's what the cell wall is like. It's like a house that's been framed but not enclosed yet. Okay? So all the cell wall is actually a frame. Okay? It's a frame that holds the cell's shape. It does not protect the cell in any way. It does not control what gets in or out. Everything can get through the cell wall. It's full of holes. Okay? Looked at through a microscope, you can actually see the fibers and the gaps between them, okay, if you have a powerful enough microscope. So it does not filter anything. It doesn't control anything. It's just a frame. Okay? And that's all. Okay, so the cell wall is just a frame. Okay, this one here shouldn't even be there, so forget about that one. Okay, next we got the smooth looking things. Okay, so this is the smooth ER. Okay, and we said that's really important. Okay, it makes hormones, it breaks down complex carbohydrates, not as important in a plant cell, but they still do have to do that. Okay. It can, make hormones, break down complex carbohydrates, detoxify poisons, okay? So it's got lots of important jobs, and obviously transport and produce lipids, okay, to repair the membrane life. All right, so I just said that plants still need to be able to break down complex carbohydrates, okay? Where do we get most of our starch when we eat it from? Okay, what types of food? Right, pasta, rice, right, potatoes, so like grains, okay, and roots, okay, contain lots of starches. Plants, okay, plants is where we get our starches from, okay, so plants obviously make starch, and they actually use it to store energy, okay, so if we have excess energy, what do we store it as? Fat. Okay? We store excess energy as fat. Plants store excess energy as lipids, or not as lipids, as starches. Okay? So if a plant is really, really starchy, it's usually the part of the plant that's being used to store energy. Or it's in the seed, and it's going to act as a energy source for the germinating seed. Okay, so in grains, when we eat grain, we're obviously eating the seed part of the grain, okay, and that's going to have starches in it because they would feed the embryonic or germinating plant. Sort of makes sense to everybody? All right, then we got the rough ER right above that. Okay, same job. It's got to transport proteins. Plants make proteins. Okay? Some plants more than others, okay? But all plants still need protein. So if you ever look at the nutritional information on your food, okay, obviously meat would have lots of protein in it, okay, but plants do have some protein in them as well, especially legumes and nuts and things like that. Okay, they're going to have a lot more protein in them, okay, but protein is still being transported around, okay, by the rough ER in a plant cell and produced by the ribosomes. Okay, the dot in the middle of the nucleus was called the Nucleolus. All right, remember that copies DNA, okay, makes ribosomes. Okay, line above that's pointing at the nucleus. Okay, role of the nucleus is just to store DNA. And then we have the nuclear membrane. Which only allows genetic material in and out of the nucleus. Okay, big clear thing in the middle. Animal cells don't have one of these, but plant cells do. What is it? Water vacuole, right. Now the role of the water vacuole is to help the cell wall maintain the shape of the cell. Okay, so it contains a fair amount of water, and that water exerts what we call turgor pressure. Okay, so an internally produced water pressure that pushes everything against the cell wall and supports it from the inside. Okay, as a plant wilts, becomes dehydrated, it will actually start to draw water out of the water vacuole. Okay, and it doesn't do that because it's using it as a reserve. It actually does that because salts begin to build up in the cytoplasm, and they actually draw water out of the water vacuole by osmosis. Okay, the plant starts to wilt. Okay, then you need to water it quickly so that you can restore that salt balance, and water can move back into the vacuole and cause the plant to stand up again. All right, the outside of the water vacuole has a special membrane called a tonoplast. And it's simply very flexible. That's why it's special. It's a very flexible type of membrane that can withstand the turgor pressure. All right, and the other thing that didn't get labeled on here that should have. Just a line to the inside of the cell, cytoplasm. Okay, that's just that fluid that fills the cell's volume and enables diffusion, which is cell transport internally, to occur. All right, questions on parts of the cell?